It is August 23rd, 2025. It's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, folks, let's not confuse marketing with substance, right? People will trot out retail narratives to try to impress you, and you need to figure out whether the narrative even applies. So, Jake Paul is about to fight Gervonta Davis. Jake Paul, and I'm being charitable here, is going to outweigh Gervonta Davis by dozens of pounds. So, in a moment of PR, public relations, Jake Paul's camp has announced that he will submit to drug testing. Folks, Jake Paul already has a significant weight advantage on Gervonta Davis. Understand, Davis has a share of the title at 135. Jake Paul fought Mike Tyson weighing in the mid 220s. Right? This is akin to, hearing that Tyson Fury is participating in drug testing protocol for an upcoming fight against a cruiserweight champion, Jay Opataya. It makes no sense. Okay, I mean, just understand, Gervonta Davis knows he's going to enter the ring at a sizable weight disadvantage. Let's go one step further. If we're going to have these fights where, a Terrence Crawford's last knockout is at 147 and he's going to face a guy who's never been knocked out for that guy's undisputed championship at 168, if we're going to have weight swings like that, if we're going to have more fights where guys who weighed at heavyweight for a fight against Mike Tyson are now fighting lightweights and exhibitions, maybe we want to consider allowing the smaller man to have a PED protocol. This might be too far ahead of society, but let me just say, if you heard that by contract, Gervonta Davis was allowed to undergo an EPO regimen, right? They give you EPO supplementation therapy when you have EPO anemia, right? Maybe we should reach the point where we say, hey, when the weight gap is past a certain point, we'll look the other way. As a Conor Benn fights a Chris Eubank, right? We'll bring this out of the shadows. We'll actually have trained healthcare professionals or people from supplement manufacturers oversee, with the cooperation of the Boxing Commission, oversee a Gervonta Davis somewhat cut the size advantage, and it's sizable, that Jake Paul's going to have by allowing him to supplement with EPO, testosterone, etc. Right? Let's think this through. Let's make another point too. Let's educate the public on this point. I could be taking EPO, have a fight in a few months, and have it so that I get the advantage of the EPO I'm taking now, because typical EPO augmentation provides you with red blood cell benefits, right? Increases the oxygen capacity of your blood for a month. In other words, I'm playing with the public. When I suddenly announce, just a few months away from my fight, hey, I'll submit to a drug testing protocol. Hey, the EPOs could be, and I'm not accusing anyone here, the EPO could be already in my system. Right? And so understand the benefits of taking EPO. Then I can train harder. In other words, I could be having EPO in my system. I'd have a distinct advantage over my opponent, because if my opponent's a Boy Scout, then because of my prior EPO dosing, I can prepare for the fight harder than my opponent. So I want the public to have some challenge flags ready. When a fighter has a fight in 12 weeks, and the fighter says, hey, I'll submit to VADA testing, right? And the fighter hasn't been on VADA testing before. That fighter might be playing games with you. That fighter might be a guy who is using substances. Some are legal, right? Creatine. We're hearing now about, how creatine helps the thought process, right? If you use these drugs, you can train harder. If I've taken EPO before I start submitting to the testing protocol, understand there are ways I can give my body the best chance to prolong the benefits of EPO, right? They involve supplementing with iron, right, which helps hemoglobin. So let me just point out too, if you're a professional athlete with a lot of money on the line for an upcoming athletic event, right, while, the retail guy is taking iron supplements, right, you could be using iron intravenously to help extend the benefits from the EPO you took earlier. Folks, we know EPO does wonders. Just look at Lance Armstrong. Just look at what happened in cycling. Just look at the number of cyclists who got busted for EPO use. Folks, they were using EPO for a reason. If EPO had no upside, then what's the point of taking it? Right? You're a world-class athlete already. There'd be too much risk. You get busted with EPO supplementation. If it wasn't giving you a benefit that was worth it, why would you be supplementing? So these drugs greatly increase performance. I mean greatly. They still benefit your body for a period of time after you stop taking them. And if you have the right team around you, if you know pharmaceuticals well enough, you'll know the vitamins to take, the food to eat, right? Red meat, beans, to help your body maintain high oxygen capacity, maintain the benefits of having taken EPO. Right, so let me say, I know boxing has a, obligation to kids and stuff like that, and I appreciate a show, right? I appreciate when, someone has a persona that's kid-friendly. I appreciated Pee Wee Herman before he got busted doing what he was doing. Right? I appreciate people who make the effort for the sake of appearances. Just understand, if a guy outweighs his opponent by dozens of pounds, the announcement that he also has agreed to drug testing is of marginal benefit. right? Also, when you do the math and you say, whoa, they're fighting this year, right? It's already August. We're already in month 8. They're fighting this year in a few months. If this guy was on an EPO regimen, he's going to have an advantage for at least the next month. That's without iron supplementation and the things that come with being a millionaire athlete and having a team around you. You know, just realize there's less to the announcement than meets the eye. Right? Also, I do want to challenge here, and don't get me wrong, I think boxing's dangerous. Guys are literally messing with an opponent's health when they're taking PEDs. But if there's a multi-divisional weight gap, and understand, the Jake Paul Gervonta Davis weight gap dwarfs the 3-division move that Terrence Crawford is making, right? Minus 1 fight at 154. That ended Bud's KO streak, right? Just understand what's happening in the Jake Paul Gervonta Davis fight dwarfs the weight gain that Bud is undergoing to fight Canelo. Let's also raise a question here that needs to be raised that I want people to think about hard. Right? Canelo, Bud, big fight for the boxing hardcore. Well, both guys are future Hall of Famers. Canelo is undisputed. Right? Canelo has been knocking guys down for a long time. Understand, the criticism of Canelo, the recent criticism, that his fights are going the distance. Ignore the fact that guys are getting knocked down in his fights. He's actually on top. You know that, watching him knock down Jaime Munguia. Then Munguia gets back up and you're thinking, well, on my scorecard, since Canelo's the champ, you know my feeling. You have to beat the champ to take his title. Since Canelo's the champ, he already has the benefit of the doubt. Now here he is getting the better of the boxing, and he's added a knockdown. After these guys, Berlanga, same type thing, after these guys get off the canvas, you're thinking to yourself, wow, I can stop scoring this fight. Because for this opponent who's getting off the canvas to beat Canelo, he's going to have to work Canelo over to the point where it's obvious without a scorecard. To the point where, you're watching the fight and you're thinking, you know what? Jaime Munguia has come back from a 4-round deficit. Right? Maybe this fight hangs in balance. In other words, Canelo's dropping guys. Right? The question has to be raised. Canelo's a cash cow, no question about it. Crawford is loved by the boxing cognoscente. He's a boxing fan's boxer. That's who he is. Right? But if you look at his box office history, it pales in comparison to Canelo's. Let's add 2 other names. It pales in comparison to Jake Paul's. Gervonta Davis, folks, he's a cash cow. This is a moment for boxing. Which fight is going to pull in the most revenue? And it's an important question to ask. Right? Because understand, if I'm going to get Canelo in the ring with Terrence Crawford, I've got to pay out a lot of money. Right? You're the promoter making it happen. Both of these guys are coming in. They're coming in at least 8 figures each. Right? Do the math. I can't call Canelo and say, hey, fight a future Hall of Famer, I'll offer you $10 million. That's not going to cut it. It has to be multiples of that. I'm going to call up, Terrence Crawford, and I'm going to say, hey, bud, I want you to fight at 168, even though you've only had one fight in the 150s and none in the 160s. And, oh yeah, the guy you're fighting, he has a high knockout ratio. That understates his power because he drops guys and lately won't push the envelope to finish off the young fighter he's dropped. Right? We'll overlook the fact that, Billy Joe Saunders, unbeaten, fights Canelo, gets stopped. Caleb Plant, unbeaten, with a title, right? Both Saunders and Caleb Plant had a title when they fought Canelo, got stopped. In other words, Canelo's already shown you he can stop, unbeaten champions. Callum Smith fought him. Callum Smith blew out a bicep. Callum Smith was on his back foot moving away from Canelo. That fight went the distance. Canelo won. So if I'm calling up Terrence Crawford and I say, hey, Terrence, I have a fight opportunity for you. You have to fight this guy, knockout puncher, who, by the way, has never been dropped in a fight. You need to fight him. How much do you want? I'm expecting Bud to say, I want the most money I've made in my career for this fight. Now, the Jake Paul side of the ledger is interesting. Right? Jake Paul is part of management. This is the entrepreneur who's also a fighter. Right? Jake Paul is the guy who also goes out and signs fighters to his outfit. Right? Jake Paul is taking risks. In other words, while he has a guarantee, understand a lot of his money comes from the back end. Right now, we need to figure out the costs and the profits. I'm interested in the profits. Which fight is going to generate more profits? Trust me when I say there are a lot of people in boxing looking at that question. Right? You got a lot of promoters out there. The fans don't understand that sometimes the greatness of the fight doesn't accurately reflect the fight's profit potential. So you'll have two great fighters. They won't fight for years. Right? Wanma, years ago. Yorkis Gamboa. They won't fight for years because the dollars don't add up. The margin on the fight is not as big as you think. Which fight's going to make more money? Canelo, Crawford. First ballot versus first ballot, in all likelihood. Or Jake Paul, a fighter who many people still question whether he really is a fighter, against a guy weighing dozens of pounds less than him. We can't even talk about weight classes because you understand once you're up around 4, 5, 6, 7 weight classes, you're just thinking to yourself, man, this just sounds ridiculous. Folks, I'm just here telling you to look for the numbers. There's a distinct possibility. Let me repeat that. A distinct possibility that Jake Paul, Gervonta Davis, might end up creating more profits than Canelo, Terrence Crawford, right? And Canelo Crawford's going to be at Allegiant Stadium where the NFL Las Vegas Raiders play. Let's see how it unfolds. Let me also say, too, that there's a possibility, and it'll be an illusion, right? If Crawford does better than expected, right? And that's a possibility. That might convince fans that Gervonta Davis has a real chance in his fight, right? You know, go online, go on X, former Twitter, Google some of the comments on the Crawford fight, right? People are sounding like Alia. They're like, you know, she said age is just a number, right? Now we're hearing weight doesn't matter, right? And of course, they take out superstar fighters, right? Wasn't Ray Robinson competitive against the light heavyweight champion? Didn't Bernard Hopkins beat the light heavyweight champion? Wasn't Henry Armstrong a guy who should have had 4 titles? Wasn't he robbed in that last fight? Right? And understand, they only had 8 weight classes back then. Right? Armstrong, of course, goes for the 4th ring. I believe that fight is controversial and was called a draw or something like that. Right? And so people will try to draw an analogy with the best fighters, the best fighters in boxing history. Right? They'll say, well, you know, didn't Manny Pacquiao go up several weights? You know, didn't Mayweather go up several weight classes? It can be done. Why are people talking about it like it's a big deal? As if we've ever seen a guy who weighed in the mid-220s fight a guy whose last fight was at 135 against a guy coming up from 130. Right, folks? You know, let's think this entire thing through. I would also argue that Henry Armstrong was a guy with a non-stop motor. You understood he was going to come in the pocket and he was going to be throwing, you know, 1.5 times to 2 times the number of punches his opponent threw. Right? If you're the smaller man, you have to go out and take the fight. Right? You can't be the smaller man and win on your back foot, especially when the other guy is the guy with the belt. Right? Unless, and I've said this in the past, unless your name is Sugar Ray Leonard. And of course, Leonard himself is one of the all-time greats. Right? So if fight fans somehow fall into an illusion, and I've been shocked by some fights in the past, right? That Roy Jones, James Toney fight still shocks me to this day. I've seen big upsets pulled, right? Toney, of course, goes into that fight like Jones, unbeaten. Right? I've seen big upsets happen. If Crawford pulls the big upset on Canelo, it shouldn't have an impact on Gervonta Davis against Jake Paul, but you and I know it will. You and I know that there's someone in your social group who is a stat person who's going to say, oh, well, look, if Crawford could win, that means that the smaller guy can win against Jake Paul. Right? Forget the fact that the word much should be in that sentence. The much smaller guy. Right, folks? To the extent that Canelo Crawford is a successful event, that's going to help the Jake Paul gate. You've been warned. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.